The council chamber of Arendor was filled with a tense silence. Every noble, every elder, and every advisor sat in their high-backed seats, watching the center of the grand hall where Elias and Lyra stood together. The ceiling arched high above them, carved with crystal patterns that caught the light of the twin suns pouring through. It should have been beautiful, but the air was heavy with suspicion and conflict. This was the moment the council had been waiting for. They had tried to stop Elias in every possible way. They had forced him through trials, sent whispers to turn the people against him, even arranged attempts on his life. Yet he stood unbroken, his posture straight, his eyes calm, his presence a silent challenge to their fear of change. Princess Lyra stepped forward first, her voice steady and strong. "Honored counselors," she said, her words echoing through the chamber. "You asked for proof. You demanded that Captain Elias Ward show his worth. He has faced every trial you created, trials that even the bravest of our people would hesitate to face. He did not falter. He did not surrender. And he stands before you today not as a conqueror, but as a man who chose love, honor, and respect." Her words carried weight, but the counselors remained still. Some shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Others whispered among themselves. Finally, the eldest counselor, a woman with silver markings on her brow, spoke in a sharp tone. "Tradition is not so easily cast aside, Princess," she said. "We have followed the same laws for centuries. Arendor must be protected from reckless choices. A human cannot rule beside you. What you ask is not simply a marriage, it is a rewriting of who we are." Elias stepped forward then. He had been quiet, allowing Lyra to speak first, but now his voice carried across the chamber. "With respect, your laws were written to preserve strength and honor. I do not seek to erase your traditions. I seek to honor them. I have faced every test with respect for your ways. I did not come to take your throne nor to command your people. I came because I love Lyra, and I am willing to give everything to stand by her side." The words hung in the air. He had not spoken with grand gestures or dramatic proclamations, only with sincerity. That honesty struck deeper than any argument of politics. Still, not all were convinced. One noble rose suddenly, his eyes flashing. "You are a danger, human. Your survival was luck, not strength. And your words are meant to charm, not to lead. We will not allow you to weaken Arendor." He reached for his ceremonial blade, intending to challenge Elias then and there. Gasps filled the chamber. The guards moved, but Lyra raised her hand sharply. "Enough!" she commanded. "No more blood, no more trials. If you cannot accept Elias by his deeds, then you must accept him by the will of the people." That was when the doors of the council chamber opened. Dozens of citizens entered, led by members of the guard who had grown sympathetic to Elias. They were not rioting, nor shouting. They stood calmly, their presence alone a statement. Men, women, and children of Arendor looked at the counselors with steady eyes. One elder among them, her hands trembling with age, stepped forward. "We have watched the human," she said softly. "We have seen his courage, his kindness, and his devotion to the princess. He has treated us not as strangers, but as equals. We believe he is worthy." The chamber erupted with murmurs. The counselors looked shaken. For centuries, their word had been law, their voices absolute. But now the people themselves had spoken, and their support for Elias could not be ignored. The eldest counselor closed her eyes, as though weighing a great burden. When she spoke again, her voice was quieter. "If the people accept him, if the princess accepts him, then we must reconsider. But know this, Captain Ward. If you fail her, if you fail Arendor, your punishment will be beyond measure." Elias nodded firmly. "I understand, and I accept." The council could resist no longer. By ancient custom, when the will of the people aligned with the will of the princess, no decree could stand against it. The counselors bowed their heads one by one, conceding defeat. The tension broke like a wave. The citizens cheered softly, and Lyra let out a breath she had been holding. She turned to Elias, her eyes shining with emotion. In that moment, surrounded by nobles, guards, and her people, she reached for his hand. "You spoke once in a whisper," she said softly, her voice carrying enough for those nearby to hear. "Now speak it again with courage." Elias smiled, remembering the moment when it had all begun. The quiet words, the simple wish. He looked into her eyes and said clearly, "I wish I could marry you." Lyra's lips curved into a radiant smile. "My answer is yes." The chamber erupted in cheers. The people's voices rose like a song. echoing through the crystalline halls. For the first time, Elias felt not like an outsider, but like a part of something larger, something brighter. The days that followed were filled with preparation. The palace transformed into a place of celebration, with glowing lanterns strung between the towers and music drifting through the air. The people of Arendor embraced the coming union, their skepticism replaced by excitement. They decorated the streets with banners that shimmered in the light, blending the symbols of Earth and Arendor together as one. Elias found himself overwhelmed at times. He had lived through battles, through dangers that tested his body and mind, but this acceptance, this joy was unlike anything he had ever known. The citizens greeted him with respect, not as a foreigner, but as one of their own. Children asked him questions about Earth, their wide eyes filled with wonder. Elders offered him blessings, speaking of new beginnings. Through it all, Lyra remained his anchor. She guided him through customs he did not yet understand, explained rituals that seemed strange to him, and always reassured him with a gentle touch or a shared smile. Their bond, forged in trials and strengthened in trust, now bloomed fully into love. On the day of the wedding, the entire city gathered in the grand square before the palace. The sky above was painted with the colors of dawn, the twin suns rising together in a rare alignment that happened only once every century. The citizens took it as a sign, a blessing for the union. Elias stood at the center, dressed in ceremonial garments crafted by Arendorian artisans, but adorned with symbols of Earth as well. The blend of cultures was striking, a true symbol of what this marriage represented. Lyra entered soon after, her gown shimmering like starlight, her presence commanding and graceful. The crowd fell silent as she walked toward him, her every step filled with purpose. When they stood together, the elder priest raised his voice. Today, we witness not just the joining of two souls, but the joining of two worlds. Let their bond be proof that love knows no boundary, that strength lies not in walls, but in bridges. Elias and Lyra exchanged vows, simple but true. Elias promised to protect her, to honor her, to share every joy and burden. Lyra promised to walk beside him, to trust him, to lead with him as one. When they sealed their vows with a kiss, the square erupted in celebration. Music filled the air, dancers twirled in the streets, and the people rejoiced. It was more than a wedding. It was a declaration that unity was possible, that differences could be overcome by courage and love. Later that evening, as the celebrations continued, Elias and Lyra stood together on a balcony overlooking the glowing city. The air was filled with laughter and song, the light of lanterns reflecting off the crystal towers. Elias leaned close, speaking softly so only she could hear. I never thought I would find a home beyond the stars, but now I know I have found it with you. Lyra rested her head against his shoulder. And I have found mine with you. They stood together in silence for a moment, watching the people celebrate below. The dangers, the trials, the opposition, all of it had led to this moment of peace and joy. Elias knew there would be challenges ahead, but he also knew they would face them together. For the first time in his life, he felt complete. Not as a soldier, not as an ambassador, but as a man who had found love and purpose among the stars. And as the twin moons rose over Arendor, casting their gentle light across the city, Elias whispered once more, this time not in doubt, but in certainty, I wish I could marry her. And beside him, Lyra's smile was the promise that his wish had come true. The stars stretched endlessly around the small diplomatic vessel as it drifted closer to the Zorathi homeworld. Through the wide observation window, Captain Elias Ward watched the swirling purple clouds and glowing rings of the alien planet. It was beautiful, but it did not calm the storm inside him. Humanity had never been this deep into Zorathi space before. This was the heart of their empire, the throne world of a species that had once called humans nothing more than clever animals. And today, he was walking straight into their royal court to ask for peace. Elias adjusted the cuffs of his uniform and took a deep breath. He was not a soldier anymore. The wars between Earth and the Zorathi had ended years ago, but the scars were still there, on both sides. Too many ships lost, too many worlds burned. Now humanity's future depended on diplomacy, and he was the one chosen to lead it. 5 minutes until arrival, Captain, said Lieutenant Mara Chen from the pilot's seat. Her voice was calm, but he could see the tension in her hands gripping the controls. Copy that, Elias replied. his gaze fixed on the massive orbital station ahead. It hung above the planet like a steel crown, large enough to hold 1,000,000 beings. This was the court of the Hive Queen, the beating heart of Zorathi power. Billions of insectoid citizens served her. Billions more worshipped her. Elias straightened his jacket one last time and glanced at the reflection in the glass. He was in his early 40s, tall and steady, with dark eyes that carried too many memories. He had seen battlefields turn to ash. He had watched enemies become allies. And now, he was about to step into the center of everything, into a court that had never once welcomed a human as an equal. The shuttle docked with a deep metallic clang. A moment later, the doors hissed open, and a wave of humid, warm air swept in. The scent was strange, spiced and earthy like a forest after rain. Zorathi air. Elias walked down the ramp with his delegation close behind. There were 5 of them. 2 diplomats, 1 linguist, 1 cultural advisor, and Mara as his security lead. None of them spoke a word. All eyes were on the grand chamber ahead. The court of the Hive Queen was unlike anything Elias had ever seen. Vast pillars of black stone reached into a ceiling hidden by mist. The floor shimmered like polished obsidian, etched with glowing golden lines that pulsed slowly, like the heartbeat of a living creature. Thousands of alien courtiers stood in orderly circles, their chitinous bodies gleaming under the soft light. The Zorathi were tall and thin, their 4 eyes reflecting light like polished jewels, their clawed hands folded in elaborate ceremonial gestures. And at the center of it all, upon a throne of carved crystal, sat the Hive Queen. Her presence was overwhelming. Twice the height of a human, her carapace was a deep shade of emerald and gold, and her 4 wings rested folded against her back like a cloak. Her eyes, huge and ancient, watched every step Elias took. Around her, advisors and nobles whispered, their antennae twitching with disapproval. Elias knew what they were thinking: human, weak, short-lived, unworthy. He forced himself to keep walking, every step measured and calm. He had prepared for this moment for months. Every gesture, every word had been chosen carefully. The fate of peace rested on his shoulders. Captain Elias Ward of the Terran Coalition, announced the translator, its mechanical voice echoing across the chamber, representative of humanity, envoy of Earth. A ripple passed through the crowd, disdain, curiosity, perhaps even fear. The Queen raised one of her segmented hands and silence fell instantly. Human, she said, her voice deep and resonant, each word carefully formed in their shared trade language. You stand before the throne of the infinite Nist. Speak. Elias stepped forward and bowed respectfully. Your Majesty, I come in the spirit of peace. Our people have been enemies for too long. Too much has been lost. I offer a new beginning. Trade, cooperation, understanding. A future where Zorathi and human do not fear one another. Murmurs broke out among the courtiers. Some clicked their mandibles in disapproval. Others hissed softly. The Queen's expression was unreadable. You speak well, she said after a pause. But words are wind. Trust is not so easily earned. I understand, Elias replied, his tone steady. But every great change begins with a first step. There was a long silence. Then the Queen did something unexpected. She rose from her throne. Perhaps, she said slowly, fate itself has already taken the first step. The crowd parted as attendants brought forth a small, cloaked figure. Elias blinked, unsure of what he was seeing. The figure was no more than a child walking unsteadily on 2 legs. Its body was covered in soft chitin, but its face was startlingly human. 2 large, expressive eyes, a small nose, a mouth that trembled with uncertainty. The chamber erupted into shocked whispers. Even the translator hesitated, unsure of how to describe what was happening. This, the Queen said, gesturing to the child, is my heir. Elias's breath caught. Her heir? He had studied Zorathi biology for months. They did not produce heirs this way. Their broods were numerous, their succession determined by ritual and strength. A single heir, especially one so different, was unheard of. The child stared at him, wide-eyed. Then slowly it stepped forward. Come, the Queen said, her voice unusually soft. Do not fear. The child walked closer and closer until it stood right before Elias. It tilted its head, as if studying him, then reached out with small, claw-tipped fingers and touched his hand. Father, it said. The word was soft. but it hit the chamber like a thunderclap. Every Zorathi in the room froze. Some hissed in outrage. Others recoiled as if struck. The translator stuttered, repeating the word again and again in disbelief. Elias could not move. His heart pounded in his chest. The child's hand was warm, alive, and its eyes were filled with something he had not expected. Recognition. He started, but the words died in his throat. "Father," the child said again, more certain this time, and clung to his hand. The silence in the chamber was absolute. Even the queen's advisors seemed too stunned to speak. Finally, one of the nobles broke the silence with a furious screech. "Blasphemy! The heir speaks heresy. The blood of the nest must not call human kin." Others joined in, their voices rising in anger. The court was collapsing into chaos, but the queen raised her hand once more. Instantly, silence returned. "Many cycles ago," the queen said, her voice cutting through the tension, "our ancestors sought strength beyond our flesh. They sought to merge the adaptability of the primates from Sol with the resilience of the nest. It was a forbidden path, but one that led to this." She gestured toward the child. "The blood of humanity flows within my heir," she continued. "And now the blood recognizes its own." Elias's mind was spinning. Human DNA? An heir part human? It was impossible, or at least it should have been. But the evidence was clinging to his hand, staring up at him with eyes so achingly familiar. "You knew," Elias said slowly. "You planned this." "I foresaw that the day would come when we must choose," the queen replied. "To continue the old ways of conquest, or to evolve beyond them. My heir is the bridge between our species, and it seems fate has chosen you as the guardian of that bridge." "Guardian?" Elias repeated, his voice barely a whisper. "Father," the child said again softly. "Stay." Something inside Elias shifted. He had come here to speak about peace in abstract terms, agreements, treaties, trade routes. But now peace was no longer an idea. It was a living, breathing child standing before him, asking him not to walk away. The courtiers hissed and shouted, their outrage barely contained. Some demanded the child be removed. Others called for Elias's immediate expulsion. But he did not step back. He knelt, meeting the child's gaze. "What is your name?" he asked gently. The child hesitated, then spoke a word in the Zorathi tongue, a name that translated roughly to hope. "Hope," Elias repeated. "It's a good name." The queen watched him closely. "You have a choice, human. You can turn away now and let fear guide the future, or you can accept what destiny has placed before you." Elias closed his eyes. He thought of the wars, the hatred, the endless cycle of mistrust. He thought of the generations yet to come and what kind of galaxy they would inherit. When he opened his eyes again, his decision was made. "I will not turn away," he said firmly. "If this child is the bridge between our peoples, then I will stand on that bridge. I will protect it." Gasps echoed through the chamber. Some courtiers recoiled. Others whispered in disbelief. But the child smiled and pressed its small hand into his. The queen's expression softened just slightly. "Then let the court remember this day. Let it be written in the scrolls of the nest. For the first time in history, the blood of Zorathi and human stands together. And just like that, the course of two civilizations began to change. The rest of the ceremony passed in a blur. Protocols were followed, speeches made, but the court's eyes never left Elias and the child who called him father. When the audience ended, the queen's attendants escorted him to private chambers. There, away from the chaos, he finally allowed himself to breathe. "What have I just agreed to?" he whispered to himself. Mara stepped forward, her voice low. "Something bigger than peace treaties, sir." Elias glanced down at the child sitting beside him. It had fallen asleep against his arm, still holding his hand tightly even in dreams. "Yeah," he murmured. "Much bigger." Outside, the great court buzzed with outrage and confusion. The news... The next morning, the chambers felt strangely quiet. Elias sat near the window, staring out at the violet clouds of the Zorathi homeworld with the child, Hope, sleeping lightly in his lap. The room was furnished in alien elegance, smooth black walls, softly glowing panels, and a faint hum that seemed alive. But despite the beauty, a tension gripped him. Yesterday had been overwhelming, and today promised only more challenges. The first challenge arrived with the sound of clicking claws. A Zorathi attendant entered, antennae twitching nervously. "Your Majesty's orders, Captain Ward," the attendant said, bowing deeply. You are to meet with the court elders. They will decide if your role with the heir is acceptable. Elias's stomach tightened. Court elders. That meant the most powerful nobles in the Zarathi Empire, many of whom had already made their opinions clear. They saw him as weak, unworthy, and dangerous. But there was no choice. If humanity was to have any chance at standing as equals, he had to face them. He stood, carefully placing Hope down on a cushioned platform. The child blinked sleepily, then reached for him. Elias crouched, letting Hope cling to his arm. "I won't let anyone hurt you," he whispered. Hope simply nodded and held on tighter. When they arrived at the council hall, Elias could feel the weight of hundreds of eyes upon him. The room was immense, circular, and rising in terraces. Thousands of nobles filled the space, their carapaces reflecting the soft ambient light. At the center sat the council, their mandibles clicking sharply in disapproval as he entered. One elder, taller than the others and with a carapace polished to a reflective gold, spoke first. "Human, you claim a bond with the heir, yet you are nothing but flesh and fleeting life. What makes you worthy?" Elias swallowed. He had expected this, but it still stung. "I am aware of your doubts," he said calmly. "I do not claim to be superior, but I do claim that I am willing to protect the child and to guide them with honesty, courage, and care. I may not be Zarathi, but I know what it means to face fear and to act with purpose." A ripple of murmur ran through the council. Some hissed in annoyance. Others leaned forward, studying him with intense curiosity. "You speak of courage," another elder said, her voice sharp as metal. "Courage is meaningless without strength. Your species is weak. Your life is short. You cannot provide the endurance or wisdom the heir requires." Elias paused, then slowly straightened his posture. "Perhaps my lifespan is short. Perhaps my strength is less than yours, but I have something that cannot be measured in years or claws. I have adaptability. I have resilience. And I have the ability to learn, to think, and to care. That is how I can protect Hope, even in ways that brute strength cannot." For a long moment, the council was silent. The words hung in the air like a challenge. Then, unexpectedly, the queen herself spoke from her throne above the hall. "The human is correct," she said, her voice echoing powerfully. "The heir does not need a bodyguard made of claws and muscle alone. They need guidance, intelligence, and compassion. Human, you may undergo the trials of parentage. Prove your worth. If you succeed, the court will accept your bond with the heir." Gasps echoed throughout the hall. Trials of parentage were ancient tests, designed to challenge mind, body, and spirit. No human had ever been permitted to attempt them. Elias's heart raced, but he forced calm. This was his chance. If he failed, humanity might never be seen as equals in the Zarathi Empire. If he succeeded, he could change everything. The first trial began immediately. Elias was led to a long corridor, walls shimmering with light. The challenge was simple in words but brutal in practice. Traverse the corridor without triggering any of the traps. They were not merely physical traps. Some emitted psychic pulses that could confuse or disorient. Others required knowledge of Zarathi history, logic, and patterns. Elias studied the corridor. He had trained for years in adaptability exercises and survival simulations, but nothing had prepared him for the alien logic embedded here. Step by step, he moved carefully, testing surfaces with a stick and watching for subtle clues in the patterns of light and sound. At one point, a false panel opened beneath him, and he leapt aside just in time. Another segment required him to answer riddles in the Zarathi tongue, testing his understanding of their language and culture. He answered carefully, thinking not only of correctness but also of meaning. Meanwhile, Hope followed closely, hovering near a protective platform that moved alongside Elias. The child's eyes followed every motion, learning and observing. Elias felt a strange warmth in his chest. This was not just a trial for him. It was a chance to show the child that humans were capable of more than what appearances suggested. Hours passed, though it felt like minutes. Finally, Elias reached the end of the corridor. The doors opened, and he stepped into a chamber filled with water-like liquid glowing softly beneath the ceiling. The second trial began here. He was told to navigate through the liquid, retrieving 3 floating orbs that represented knowledge, courage, and wisdom. But the liquid was alive. It resisted him, flowing against his movement, creating currents that tested his stamina. Elias focused. He timed his movements, predicting the currents and using them to propel himself forward. With patience and careful planning, He retrieved the first two orbs. The third orb, however, was deeper, in a section where the currents moved unpredictably. His first attempt failed. He stumbled, water pushing him backward, and he almost lost Hope's sight in the chaos. Then he paused. He took a deep breath and considered the problem. Brute force would not work. He needed creativity. Using his knowledge of physics and the behavior of fluid dynamics, he altered his approach. He shifted his weight, moved in diagonal angles, and allowed the liquid itself to carry him. Step by step, he reached the final orb and secured it in his hands. Exhausted but triumphant, he emerged from the liquid chamber. Hope clapped its small hands, squealing in delight. For the first time, a few of the Zorathi nobles in the viewing chamber allowed themselves to show approval. Some clicked mandibles in respect. Others were still skeptical, but murmurs of admiration began to ripple through the hall. The third trial was the most unexpected. Elias was taken to a room of mirrors, each reflecting his image back at him, but with subtle differences. Some mirrors exaggerated his fears, others projected doubts about his ability to protect Hope. The Zorathi explained, the final trial was one of empathy and emotional strength. He had to confront his own fears and show the court that he could remain steadfast in protecting the child. Elias walked slowly among the mirrors. He saw images of warfields, the faces of soldiers lost under his command, and the horrors of the galaxy. He felt doubt creeping in, but he remembered Hope's small hand in his yesterday, the child's trust in him. That was more powerful than fear. He reached out and touched the largest mirror. The reflection shimmered and changed. Not a distortion, but a perfect image of him holding Hope securely. The mirrors began to fade. A soft voice echoed in the chamber, translating the Queen's words. Your mind is strong. Your heart is steadfast. You understand what it means to protect, to guide, and to love. This is what the heir requires. This is what makes you worthy. Elias felt a mixture of relief and disbelief. He had passed, not through strength alone, not through intimidation or cunning, but by showing qualities that the Zorathi had never valued in humans before. Empathy, adaptability, courage in the face of uncertainty. These were the traits that made him exceptional. When he returned to the court, the reactions were different. Some nobles still whispered in doubt, but many were now watching with awe. The Hive Queen's eyes gleamed. It seems, she said, that humans are not merely clever but capable of great heart. The heir's choice is validated. Elias looked down at Hope, who now rested against his chest. The child's expression was joyful, trusting, unafraid. For the first time, he felt the weight of the court's expectations shift, not as a burden but as an opportunity. What now? Mara asked softly, following him back to the chambers. Now, Elias replied, stroking Hope's small head. We show them that being human is more than survival. It is courage, it is creativity, and it is heart. And we do it together. Outside, the Zorathi court continued to murmur. The news of the trials would travel fast. Some would accept the human's worth. Others would plot against him. But one thing was certain. Humanity had made its first step into the heart of the Zorathi Empire. And it had done so not with weapons, but with qualities that could never be measured in claws or numbers. As the stars shone above the planet, Elias understood something profound. This was more than a trial. This was the beginning of a new chapter, not just for him, not just for Hope, but for all of humanity. He was no longer a visitor in the Zorathi Empire. He was part of its story. And if he could protect this child, guide this heir, then perhaps, just perhaps, humans could prove themselves to the galaxy. And with that thought, he held Hope tightly, feeling a quiet determination settle in his chest. The court might doubt him, the nobles might scheme, but nothing could shake the bond he now had with the child. And that bond would be the strongest weapon of all. The court had grown tense, like a hive about to collapse under pressure. Elias had thought that passing the trials and surviving the assassination attempt would calm the nobles. But he had underestimated the depth of their resentment. Some factions still whispered against him, plotting in shadows, their eyes fixed on Hope. It was not just his intelligence, courage, or adaptability that had earned their cautious respect. It was the fear that humans were unpredictable and, perhaps, stronger than anyone expected. Elias stood by the balcony of the private chambers, Hope resting lightly against his shoulder. The city below stretched endlessly, a labyrinth of towers, bridges, and glowing pathways. The hum of alien life filled the air. It was a world unlike any human city, and yet it felt strangely alive. Hope's small hand tugged at his jacket. "Father," the child said softly, eyes wide. "Will they try again?" Elias bent down and smiled gently, brushing a lock of hair from Hope's face. "Some may," he admitted, "but we are ready, and we will face it together." The warning had been clear. Despite the trials and the successes in diplomacy, some nobles were not done. They had begun organizing openly, forming alliances with mercenary factions and rebellious elements from distant colonies. Elias had received intelligence of this through subtle channels. His human instincts told him that the danger was growing, but the Queen's acknowledgement of his bond with Hope gave him authority, albeit fragile, to act. The next morning, Elias was summoned to the throne chamber. The Queen's wings were spread elegantly, her eyes sharp as ever. The courtiers were tense, their chatter restrained. "Captain Ward," she began, "the situation has escalated. A faction within the court has mobilized against us. They plan to strike tonight during the Festival of Lights, when the palace will be filled with dignitaries. Your skills will be tested once again. Protect the heir. Protect the court. Show the strength of humanity." Elias nodded, his mind already calculating possibilities. "I understand, Your Majesty. We will be prepared." The festival began at dusk. Thousands of glowing orbs lit the hallways, casting reflections on polished floors. The air smelled of spiced nectar and exotic flowers. Zorathi music, deep and resonant, filled the chambers, while nobles from across the empire mingled. Elias moved carefully, Hope held close. Every shadow could hide a threat. Every smile could conceal a weapon. He had prepared for this. He had stationed loyal guards strategically, mapped escape routes, and briefed his team on contingencies. But even with preparation, Elias knew instinct and adaptability would be critical. As the festival reached its peak, the attack came. A sudden eruption of motion in the upper galleries revealed masked assassins, armed with blades and strange devices. The nobles screamed, some frozen in fear, others attempting to defend themselves. Elias reacted instantly. He threw himself in front of Hope, pulling the child behind him as he dodged a swinging blade. His years of combat training, human reflexes, gave him an edge. He moved through the crowd, using quick thinking to redirect attackers, knocking weapons aside without injuring the innocents nearby. Hope clung to him, eyes wide but trusting, antennae quivering. Several Zorathi guards tried to intercept the intruders, but the attackers were skilled and coordinated. Elias realized that brute force alone would not suffice. He had to think creatively, using the environment to his advantage. He grabbed a hanging light orb and swung it, creating a dazzling flash that blinded several attackers. Then he kicked a panel on the floor, revealing a hidden trapdoor. "Through here," he shouted to the guards and Hope. Together they moved into a narrow corridor, forcing the attackers to follow. Elias used the twists and turns, the tight spaces, and his knowledge of human agility to neutralize the threat. One by one, the attackers were trapped or disarmed. Meanwhile, the Queen had acted decisively. She and a contingent of loyal nobles arrived at the central hall, engaging remaining conspirators. Her presence alone inspired fear and hesitation among the attackers. Elias could see the tide turning. Once the immediate threat was neutralized, the Queen approached him. Her eyes reflected both relief and something deeper. "You have done more than survive, human. You have protected the heir and upheld the court. Your courage has changed perceptions today." Elias's chest rose and fell with exertion. He glanced down at Hope, who looked up at him with admiration and trust. "We did it together," he said softly. The child smiled, antennae waving lightly. The aftermath of the attack left the court shaken but enlightened. The conspirators were captured and removed from power. Some loyal nobles who had doubted Elias now acknowledged the human strength and judgment. Even Vrak, the golden-armored elder, remained subdued. His schemes thwarted and influence diminished. Over the next days, Elias worked tirelessly to strengthen the court's defenses and to consolidate alliances. He instructed human and Zorathi forces on communication and coordination strategies, blending Earth ingenuity with Zorathi traditions. Hope remained by his side, learning quickly and observing how decisions were made. Elias realized that protecting the child was not just about physical security. It was about fostering leadership, teaching discernment, and guiding the future. One afternoon, as the palace gardens glowed with bioluminescent flowers, Elias found a quiet moment with Hope. The child's small hand grasped his and their eyes met. "Father," Hope said, "will they ever like humans?" Elias smiled gently. "Some may never understand us. Some may always doubt. But others will see our heart, our courage, and our creativity. That is enough. That is how we make change." Hope nodded thoughtfully, antennae swaying. "Then we must show them." "Yes," Elias replied. "Together we will show them." That evening, the Queen summoned him again. Her wings glimmered in the soft light. "Captain Ward," she said, "you have passed the ultimate test of courage. You have faced conspiracies, attacks, and fear itself, and you have emerged unbroken. Your bond with the air is now indisputable. Humanity has shown the court that it is not weak, but capable of great deeds." Elias bowed respectfully. "Thank you, Your Majesty. But it is Hope's trust that has given me strength. Without the child's courage and belief, I would not have been able to succeed." The Queen studied them both, her eyes softening. "The heir has chosen wisely. Let it be known that the human is now guardian and protector, fully recognized by the throne." Word spread quickly throughout the empire. Stories of Elias's bravery circulated in hushed tones, then louder and louder. Humans were no longer outsiders. They were seen as partners, capable of courage, insight, and unwavering loyalty. The court that had once dismissed humanity as weak began to reconsider. In the weeks that followed, Elias continued to teach Hope and guide the court. The child's confidence grew and their bond deepened. Every day, Elias discovered new ways that human qualities, creativity, empathy, determination, could complement Zorathi's strength and tradition. It was a delicate balance, but one that showed the potential for a new era. Despite these victories, Elias remained vigilant. He knew there would always be those who doubted, who plotted, who sought to undo what had been accomplished. But for the first time, he felt that humanity had earned its place among empires not through dominance, but through the courage of heart and the strength of spirit. One evening, standing once more on the balcony with Hope, Elias looked out over the city. The lights shimmered like a million stars reflected on the ground. The palace hummed softly with life, and the distant sounds of the city created a rhythm that resonated with the pulse of the universe itself. Hope looked up at him, eyes shining with trust. "Father, will humans always be brave?" Elias chuckled softly, brushing a hand over the child's head. "Bravery isn't about never being afraid. It's about what you do when you are afraid. Humans, at their best, show courage even when the odds are impossible. That is what makes us strong." The child nodded, antennae twitching in understanding. Elias felt a profound sense of purpose settle in his chest. This was more than survival. This was legacy. Humanity's qualities, resilience, empathy, creativity, and courage, were no longer theoretical. They were alive in the eyes of the child and recognized by the Hive Queen and the court. As the moons rose over the palace, Elias held Hope close. The events of the past weeks had been harrowing, but they had also been transformative. Humanity had faced the impossible, had been tested in ways that no one expected, and had emerged not only unbroken but respected. For the first time, Elias allowed himself to imagine the future. A future where humans were not just visitors in alien empires, but partners, protectors, and leaders in their own right. And at the heart of that future stood a small child, part human, part Zorathi, and the man who had become the child's father. Together they had survived conspiracies, attacks, and doubt. Together they had begun a new chapter for both species. And together they would face whatever came next, unyielding, unafraid, and united by trust and courage. Elias felt the weight of responsibility, but it no longer felt heavy. It felt right. Humanity had proven itself not through war or conquest, but through heart, wisdom, and bravery. And in the court of the Hive Queen, for the first time, the universe could see what humans were truly capable of. And so, as the stars shone above the Zorathi palace, Elias Ward, human, protector, and father, prepared for the challenges yet to come. The rebellion had been crushed, but the echoes of battle still hung in the air of the Zorathi palace. The great halls were scarred with the marks of weapons, the scent of burned metal lingered, and whispers of fear still passed among the nobles. Yet amid the silence and the uncertainty, one truth remained. Humanity had stood firm. One human, Elias Ward, had faced the storm and had not only survived, but proven himself before the most powerful court in the empire. Elias stood in the grand chamber once more, the same chamber where the child had first called him father. The queen's throne glimmered beneath the light of 100 glowing orbs. The nobles sat in their places, their expressions guarded but different now. No longer did their eyes hold only disdain. Now there was something else. Reluctant respect, cautious curiosity, and for some even admiration. Hope sat beside Elias, the small child's antennae twitching nervously. Though young, the child carried the weight of heritage, the symbol of the Zorathi's future, and in calling Elias father, Hope had bound humanity to the fate of the empire in a way no one had expected. The queen rose slowly, her wings spreading with grace and power. The court has seen the trials, the court has seen the rebellion, and the court has seen who stood against it. Her gaze swept over the nobles, her voice echoing with command. It was not only my loyal warriors. It was not only my strength. It was this human Elias Ward, who shielded the air when blades fell. He did not run. He did not falter. He proved that humanity is not weak. Murmurs swept through the hall. Some nobles bowed their heads in shame. Others clenched their claws in frustration. But none could deny the truth of her words. Elias stood tall, though his heart pounded. He had never sought to be part of such a grand stage. He had come as a diplomat, a negotiator, nothing more. Yet here he was, standing at the center of history. The queen turned to him. "You have shown courage that my people will remember. But words are not enough. I ask you now, Elias Ward, will you accept the duty of guardian to the heir? Will you bind your life to the child as protector and teacher, until the heir takes the throne?" The hall fell silent. Every noble leaned forward, waiting for his answer. Elias looked down at Hope. The child's wide eyes gazed up at him, full of trust and expectation. He thought of the moments they had shared, the quiet talks on balconies, the dangerous escapes through corridors, the whispered questions about humanity. He thought of the word father, spoken with such innocence and such power. Elias took a breath. "I accept," he said firmly. "I will protect the heir, not for power, not for glory, but because the child trusts me. I cannot turn away from that trust. Humanity does not turn away from those who need us." The hall erupted. Some nobles shouted in anger. Others applauded with strange insectoid gestures, clattering their limbs against the floor. The queen raised her hand and silence fell again. "So it shall be," she declared. "The human is guardian. The child is protected, and the bond between our species is sealed." From that day, the palace changed. Elias was no longer treated as an outsider. Though some still whispered and doubted, many began to approach him with curiosity. They asked about human history, human stories, human inventions. Some even asked to train with him, eager to learn the strange tactics that had allowed him to defeat warriors stronger and faster than himself. Hope grew more confident too. The child walked beside him openly in the halls, antennae raised, speaking proudly of "my father." Every time those words were spoken, Elias felt the weight of responsibility, but also a warmth he could not explain. He had lost family long ago back on Earth, but here in this alien palace he had gained something unexpected. Weeks passed, and the festival of renewal approached. This ancient celebration marked the turning of the seasons and the promise of future generations. It was also a time when declarations of alliance were made. The queen announced that during the festival she would present the heir and the guardian before the empire. Elias prepared carefully. He trained harder than ever, balancing diplomacy with strategy, guiding Hope in small lessons of leadership. He taught the child simple truths of humanity. Why stories mattered, why kindness mattered, why even weakness could become strength if met with determination. Hope listened carefully, repeating the words as though they were treasures. The day of the festival arrived. The entire capital was alive with lights, banners, and music. Millions of citizens gathered outside the palace, their voices blending into a constant hum. Inside, the nobles filled the grand chamber once more. This time there was no hostility in the air, only expectation. The queen rose and extended her wings. "Today we present the heir, symbol of the future. Today we present the guardian, proof of humanity's courage. Today we declare that the bond between our people is no longer uncertain, but real." Elias stepped forward, holding Hope's hand. The child walked proudly, antennae waving, eyes bright with determination. Together they approached the throne. The hall erupted in sound, cheers clattering, resonant tones of approval. For the first time, Elias saw not only respect but acceptance in the eyes of many nobles. Hope raised a small hand. "This is my father," the child said, voice clear. "He is human, but he is also my protector. He is also my family." And with him I am not afraid. The hall grew silent at those words, silent in awe. Even the harshest critics could not deny the sincerity in the child's voice. Elias felt his chest tighten. He had not expected such open declaration, but hearing it made every trial, every battle worth it. The queen stepped forward. Let it be written in the records of the empire. The human is father to the heir. Humanity stands with us. From this day forward, their place in our empire is secure. Cheers filled the hall. The sound rolled through the palace, out into the streets, carried to the farthest corners of the city. Humanity's name was no longer spoken with disdain. It was spoken with respect. In the days that followed, emissaries from other worlds arrived. They came to see the human who had defied assassins, who had passed ancient trials, who had stood before a court of enemies and left as a father to the heir. Elias found himself the center of attention, yet he remained humble. He always reminded them that what he did was not for fame or power, but for the child who trusted him. At night, when the palace grew quiet, Elias would stand on the balcony with Hope. They would look out at the city together, lights glowing like stars. Hope would ask questions about Earth, about oceans, forests, animals, and skies. Elias would tell stories, simple stories of rivers and birds, of storms and sunlight. Hope would listen with fascination, as though every word was a piece of treasure. One evening, the child asked softly, "Father, do you think humans and Zarathi can be family? Not just us, but all?" Elias smiled, placing a hand gently on the child's head. "Yes, I believe we can. It will not be easy. Some will resist, some will fight. But if we keep showing them what trust means, what courage means, then yes, we can be family." Hope nodded, eyes shining. "Then I will help. I will be a leader who remembers both sides." Elias felt pride swell in his chest. He had not only protected the heir, he had begun to guide a future ruler who believed in unity. That, he realized, was humanity's true victory. The years ahead would not be simple. There would be challenges, conflicts, and those who sought to undo the fragile bond. But Elias no longer feared. Humanity had proven itself in the most unexpected way. Not through fleets or armies, but through the courage of one man, the innocence of one child, and the power of trust. As the festival lights dimmed and the stars appeared above, Elias held Hope close. For the first time in his life, he felt at peace. Humanity's place in the galaxy was no longer in question. It had been earned not through conquest, but through compassion and bravery. And in the quiet of that moment, Elias understood the truth. One word, Father, had changed everything.